Nick Marshall loves women, but in his own way. His mother was a dancer in the corps de ballet, so he spent his childhood in the dressing room, where half-naked girls were constantly snooping around. For his mother, nothing was more important than her son, and he became a real mascot dancer. He did not pay attention to women since childhood, and therefore grew up a desperate womanizer, who believes that he has thoroughly studied the opposite sex. In the mornings, Nick is awakened by a visiting housekeeper, whom he simply calls Bae. She picks up the dirty rags, the unfinished whiskey and snacks mixed in with the women's underwear and sends them to the laundry. Nick doesn't get to work before 10. He is an advertising agent, one of the best, and on this day he is to be promoted. Nick is already being congratulated by his colleague Morgan and the faithful secretaries. Nick comes into the office of his boss, whose name is Dan Von Maker, and he says that women now rule in sales, which means that a woman should be hired for the position of creative director that Nick was supposed to get. Just recently, advertising shark Darcy McGuire quit. Nick is of course upset, but there's nothing to do. He'll have to submit, though he thinks he can easily survive Darcy and take her place. After unpleasant conversations with his boss, Nick goes to his ex-wife Ginya's wedding. Here he is informed that Gingy and her new husband are going away on a honeymoon, and his 16-year-old daughter, Alex, will move in with Nick for the time being. His relationship with his daughter doesn't work out, and so they're not thrilled about this cohabitation. When Nick returned to work, Dan Von Maker introduced Darcy Simone McGuire to the staff. Darcy immediately took the team in stride by handing out boxes of items designed for women to everyone. Each employee had to figure out overnight how to sell each item individually or all together. At home, Nick gets high on wine, puts on some music, and tries to figure out all the feminine stuff from the box. At first, however, he doesn't succeed. Then Nick takes a CD of teenage girl music from his daughter's backpack, pours even more alcohol into himself, and gets down to business. He glues a pore-clearing strip on his nose, dabs his hair with mousse, paints his eyelashes and nails, and pulls out the vegetation on his leg with a wax strip. And as the cherry on the cake, he puts on pantyhose. Just as Nick was about to try on a bra, Alex comes home with her boyfriend. She and her father argue. Alex accuses Nick of not caring about anyone and not even remembering her boyfriend's name. And when Nick remembers it and runs to tell his daughter, he drops a can of pellets, slips and collapses into a tub of water. The hairdryer he was holding in his hand landed next to him. Nick got a good shock, to the point where he collapsed on the floor and didn't get up until morning. Nick was woken up by a grunting Babe. However, when he admonished her, the woman said she hadn't said anything. At the hotel exit, Flo, as usual, caught him in a cab. Nick felt as if he could hear her vulgar thoughts.
Thank you, Flo.
You're welcome, my little sweet ass.
He decided to walk to work, and then finding himself in a crowd of women, Nick realized that he wasn't even imagining things at all. He was really starting to hear women's thoughts. At work, he was attacked by the thoughts of his coworkers, and he didn't like them. His image of the irresistible womanizer, adored by women, formed in Nick's head, began to crumble. Nick even noticed Erin, the girl delivering papers around the office. She thinks that no one notices her and is thinking about suicide, and only his secretaries give Nick a break. Complete silence reigns in their heads. He shares his worries with Morgan, but he thinks Nick is joking. He drags him to a meeting arranged by Darcy. At it, everyone has to talk about their ideas about women's goods. Nick also tried to pitch an idea about a naked girl under a waterfall in a lipstick commercial, but in his mind his female colleagues immediately protested, and he shut up. Then Nick overheard a colleague musing that she takes headache pills even if her head doesn't hurt, just to avoid having sex with her husband. He liked the idea and shared it with the others. However, Darcy took it without enthusiasm, though she praised Nick for his originality. Nick realizes that he has failed. Moreover, he cannot think straight because of the constant hum of women's thoughts. So he returns home, kicks out his boyfriend Alex, with whom she is going to prom, repeats everything he did the day before and goes out on the balcony in a thunderstorm with his hairdryer on. A lightning strike hits the hairdryer and Nick passes out. But in the morning he can't check to see if he's lost his ability. As luck would have it, there are no women around. Nick goes to the supermarket, which is full of women, and realizes that he keeps hearing their thoughts. Then he rushes to the therapist that he and his ex-wife used to go to. He proves to her through experience that he does hear women. And the astonished therapist opens Nick's eyes. Knowing what women are thinking, he can control them. Nick takes the therapist's advice and goes first to seduce a barista named Lola. She is crazy about Nick, but has long rejected his advances. Eavesdropping on her thoughts, Nick easily convinces Lola to go out with him. At work, he charms almost every female employee one by one, and then heads to Darcy's. Nick is determined to get out of the company. He overhears her thinking that Nike is looking for a new ad agency. It's a very big order and Nick wants to take it on. However, Darcy warns him that it's important to think as a woman here because Nike wants to promote a new collection of women's clothing. Nick convinces Darcy that he can do it. He eavesdrops on her thoughts and voices them faster than Darcy herself. Alex is waiting for him at home with his high school girlfriends, and the girls are not thrilled with him. However, Nick quickly rectifies the situation by promising his daughter that he will take her shopping for a dress for the prom. In the evening, he goes on a date with Lola, after which she invites him to her place. But because Nick hears all her thoughts, he can't concentrate, and nothing works out for him. But Nick is not one of those who are used to giving in to difficulties. He pulls himself together, goes to bed with Lola, and does everything the way Lola wants him to in her thoughts. After that, the girl literally melts with pleasure. Nick wants to get a contract with Nike, because then he can get rid of Darcy. So he eavesdrops on what women are thinking everywhere he goes. He even charms all of his female colleagues who used to have a low opinion of him. When Nick works together with Darcy, he begins to admire her ability to create the right slogans. He hears her thoughts and supplements them with his own, so they get great ideas. Darcy begins to like Nick, too. He even stays together after work just to chat. Things are also getting better with Nick in his relationship with Alex. They pick out her prom dresses together, and in the process, Nick overhears her thinking that she's going to sleep with her boyfriend after prom. Nick decides to have a conversation with her about sex, but Alex's mom has already talked about everything, and Nick doesn't need to play the caring dad. Annoyed, Nick is watching TV at home when Darcy calls him and he invites her to the restaurant for a cocktail. In the process, Nick knows that Darcy is divorced, which is why she left her last job since she and her husband worked together. After spending a pleasant evening, they kiss and head home. Darcy wanted to invite Nick back to her place, but he wouldn't let her say so. When Nick returns home, Lola is waiting for him at the front door. All 6 days after they met, she's been worried sick because Nick hasn't called once. She thinks he is gay because he understands her so well. In her mind, she begs him to tell her he's gay and then she'll leave him for someone else. That's why she doesn't tell him he's gay. At work, Nick eavesdrops on Erin's thoughts again, who thinks he is invisible. He makes inquiries of the secretaries, and they tell him that she once wanted to write texts for an advertisement, but Nick rejected her candidacy. That day is supposed to be the presentation of an advertisement for Nike. Darcy convinces Nick that he should be the one doing the presentation, although he tries to explain to her that she came up with most of the ideas. Darcy, however, does not think so. The presentation goes top-notch. In the evening, Nick writes Darcy a message in which he wants to confess that he has stolen almost all of her ideas. But then Darcy herself walks in and invites Nick to her new apartment, where they spend a romantic evening. The next day, Nick learns from his boss that Nike has agreed to a contract, but he fires Darcy. Nick says he has to get her back, since she's the one who came up with almost all the moves for the Nike ads. He himself goes to her to explain himself. On the way, Nick knows that Erin didn't go to work today and hasn't heard from her. Nick goes to visit Erin. He fears the girl has committed suicide. Erin lives in Chinatown, and an elderly Chinese woman shows Nick the way to her house. Then lightning strikes a transformer box, the wires spark, and Nick feels that nothing about himself has changed. The door to the apartment faithfully turns out to be open. Inside, Nick finds a pill bottle and a parting note, but Erin was alive. She snuck up behind her and almost hit Nick with a tennis racket. After exchanging a few words with her, Nick realized he'd stopped hearing women's thoughts. He tells Erin that he wants to hire her to write promotional texts, and the girl agrees. Nick tries to call Darcy all day, but she doesn't pick up the phone. Gingy calls him and tells him about Alex, who is all in tears. She calls her several times. Nick rushes to his daughter's graduation. Alex has locked herself in the bathroom and refuses to come out. Turns out she decided not to sleep with her boyfriend and he immediately dumped her. Nick calms his daughter down and takes her home. However, he himself cannot sleep. Nick is disturbed by the situation with Darcy. He goes to her house to explain himself. Nick tells her that he has been using her ideas all along to survive and leave the company, but he gradually fell in love with her. He proves to Darcy that he really has changed and asks her to come back, especially since his boss agrees to it. Darcy, on the other hand, realizes that Nick has had to get over himself, that he is the one who must be rescued, because he has never been so frank with a woman in his life. She loves him, so she forgives him and asks him not to leave. Darcy kisses Nick, and he responds to her kiss. Like, subscribe, and the name of the movie in the comments.